My name is Meerah, and I am a Lorekeeper in one of the ASUS libraries, and today I wanted to talk about Calvin the Martian from the 2017 movie Life. The film's antagonist has been compared to the Blob, the Thing, and Xenomorphs. Interestingly, there is a reference to Calvin in the video game SteelSeries. While Calvin is technically devoid of sex or gender, I keep accidentally referring to it with male pronouns due to the name Calvin being more on the masculine side. So if I slip up and call Calvin a he instead of an it, I apologize. Life is a movie directed by Daniel Espinosa in 2017 and is quintessentially Lovecraftian in that you can't get much more cosmic horror than a horror taking place in the cosmos. I feel like I shouldn't really have to say this, but this video has heck of spoilers for the movie Life, so if you haven't seen it yet and you want to see it, pause this and go watch it, I guess? I don't know. I'm just going to quickly summarize the film. I'm gonna try to be as spoiler-free as possible, but I mean, like, it's a horror film where everybody dies. The main antagonist of Life is the alien life form dubbed Calvin. It was discovered as a sample of organic tissue on Mars. The crew of the International Space Station exposed it to water and nutrients and glucose, which it absorbed and began to grow into a multicellular form. Each of Calvin's individual cells are simultaneously a muscle, a nerve, and an eye, which sounds like a hell, honestly. It's also presumed, and later proven, that Calvin is highly intelligent. Upon its discovery, it was assumed that Calvin was an apex predator indigenous to Mars. While watching this movie, I distinctly remember during the scene where the school children named the life form discovered on Mars Calvin, that I too, as a cosmic horror, would want revenge if I was named that. Not a very scary or epic name, is it? After an accident in the lab, Calvin goes into a sort of hibernation. Hugh, the scientist responsible for experimenting and interacting with Calvin, for some demented reason decides it's a good idea to try to wake Calvin up with an electrical shock. I don't know, call me wild and crazy, but it seems like common sense to me to think that giving an unknown wild animal, basically, an electrical shock is a bad idea. And to literally no one's surprise, Calvin does not like this and interprets it as a hostile act. It wakes Calvin up alright. Calvin breaks and maims Hugh's hand and uses the shock wand to puncture the quarantine glove thing, escaping confinement out into the lab. Here is where we see the first dramatic example of one of Calvin's super special awesome alien abilities. Calvin approaches a lab rat and absorbs the animal in order to increase its own biomass. At this point, another member of the crew, Rory, enters the lab to rescue Hugh, but it becomes trapped himself, which results in Calvin crawling into his mouth and consuming his organs. When Calvin emerges from Rory, the life form has grown exponentially in size, now donning kind of like tentacle-like appendages. Throughout the rest of the movie, we follow the remaining crew members as they attempt to survive, but one by one, Calvin either causes the death of or feeds off of the crew. Throughout all of this, Calvin shows incredible intelligence, and it is speculated that Calvin was actually the culprit behind life being completely wiped out on Mars, not being indigenous to Mars. The end of the film reveals that Calvin actually makes it to Earth. However, it was mentioned in an interview with the director that humanity may not have been entirely doomed, as Calvin may have eventually learned a way to communicate. I would actually believe that, as we see when Calvin interacts with the lab rat. It is gentle with it right up until the rat bites him, and then he becomes violent and absorbs it. The same could technically be said for the ISS crew. Calvin was gentle and curious in its interactions with Hugh, right up until Hugh shocked Calvin, which was interpreted as a violent, hostile act, and so Calvin reciprocated. I don't know, I could see it. I could see Calvin being intelligent enough to develop a way to communicate and living peacefully with the people on Earth, but who knows? It's never really explained or told to us. Calvin's appearance changes throughout the film, but generally resembles a white translucent cnidarian. Its translucent skin allows its circulatory system to be visible beneath it. As the film goes on, Calvin grows in size as it absorbs and feeds off the various life forms in the ISS. By the end, Calvin even appears to have a face. Calvin has a number of interesting abilities. It is incredibly strong, at the minimum has the intelligence of a human, if not more intelligent, is extremely resilient and durable, having proven it can survive in the vacuum of space, as well as extremely high temperatures. It requires oxygen to survive, but it can suspend its use of oxygen for very long periods of time. Calvin's ability to absorb its prey in order to accelerate its own growth is perhaps the most interesting of the lifeform's capabilities. Calvin does seem to make noise in the form of growls and hissing, and it manifests tentacle-like limbs to help with locomotion motion and interacting with its environment. Calvin is a carbon-based entity and has a known lifespan of millions of years, going into hibernation whenever it cannot attain food. However, it's entirely possible that it can live indefinitely. And that's really all we know about Calvin. I think about this film a lot, if I'm honest. It stuck with me for some reason, and I just really needed to talk about Calvin to get it out of my system. The little guy lives rent-free in my head, and I cannot explain to you why. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me today and listening to me ramble. I hope to see you next time here in the library.